So we finally have the main event for UFC 300. And I think a very important takeaway we should all have after going through this entire saga of witnessing the construction of this card is how important it is to keep people's expectations low. Because the way Dana White hyped UFC 300 up, how could he possibly have not disappointed people? I mean, the way he was talking about this event, you'd think we were about to witness the second coming of Christ. When talking about the main event, Dana White said himself that it was going to blow everyone's mind. Now, the only issue there is, what would actually blow my mind? And the only one I could think of is Conor Khabib 2. If he came out there and said, we're getting a Conor Khabib rematch, okay, all right, mind blown. But what else is there? So why even say that? But if I were to put all of this aside and just judge the card for what it is, it's an amazing card. It is absolutely amazing. I'm sure as some of you know, I think the BMF title is fucking gross. I would have much rather had Max versus Gaethje as just a 3-rounder on the main card. Or hell, make it a 5-round fight on the main card. I mean, if Dana White can just make up belts whenever he wants, then he can put as many rounds on whatever fight he wants. And then put Leon versus Bellamir as the co-main. I think that would have elevated the card even more. But as long as the BMF title isn't taking the main event spot, okay, I'll get over it. I'll stop complaining. Because the main event we do have between Alex Pereira versus Jamahal Hill is solid. I mean, it's super, super solid. I don't know anybody who doesn't like to watch Alex Pereira fight. But there are some very interesting variables going into this fight. Probably the most interesting of which is that Jamahal Hill ruptured his Achilles this last July. That gives him a 9-month gap in between that and this fight. But in all honesty, more like a 7-month gap, because he has to get into training camp. So that gives room for speculation. Is Hill completely healed, or is the UFC just throwing a bag at him in order to make this main event happen? That's anybody's guess. And mix in the fact that Alex Pereira has the best leg kicks in the sport. And all of a sudden, it seems like a really tough fight for Hill. But, funny enough, I've actually been seeing a decent amount of people picking Jamahal Hill to win this fight. And I think it's pretty easy to tell why. For one, a healthy Jamahal Hill is 100% a dangerous fight for Alex Pereira. And that's because the one thing that sets Jamahal Hill apart from everybody else is his speed and his boxing. Primarily his boxing combinations. Hill is super quick and he has really good head movement. He'll slide just out of range of your punches and then blitz in with a 3, 4, 5 punch combination. His fight with Thiago Santos was something truly to behold. Santos, as we know, is known for his power. But Jamahal was just fearless against him. He was lunging in with these wild strikes, leaving himself pretty open at times. And in fact, he was getting tagged pretty cleanly, but he was just eating it and returning. The finishing sequence of that fight was absolutely insane. Hill is just choosing to stand right in the pocket with him, lighting him up. Thiago Santos is throwing these huge winging hooks, and he's landing them. But Jamal's just eating them, throwing back, eventually breaking him. Santos just collapses. I mean, Jamahal has a serious chin on him. He didn't seem wobbled or hurt from any of these shots. But he's also super well-rounded. He's got really good high kicks. I mean, he had Glover on skates with these high kicks he was landing. Really good takedown defense, which I don't think is going to play a huge factor in this fight. But also very, very little takedown offense from Hill, which probably will play a big factor in this fight. But the other huge variable when it comes to this specific matchup is that Jamahal Hill is always the one pressuring his opponent. He likes to hold the center and walk guys down. And as we've seen in the past, Pereira will allow himself to get backed up. And that's where I think people are picking Jamahal Hill in this fight. The one thing we know about Alex Pereira is he is hittable from his fights with Jiri and Adesanya, and hell, even Bruno Silva. You can hit him. And one thing specifically I've heard people say is that if you get Pereira backed up to the fence, his boxing defense is awkward. He kind of puts his arms up and out and is almost kind of reaching, and he's very vulnerable there. So, to a lot of people, this makes perfect sense. Jamahal Hill, really high-level boxer, good combinations, and he's always marching his opponents down. If he gets Alex Pereira pushed up against the fence, he'll be able to take advantage of Alex's awkward boxing defense, being able to land punches, and even if Pereira does find counters, as we've seen in the past, Jamahal Hill will eat these winging overhands and still be okay. And of course, this scenario I just laid out, of course it's possible. You don't need me to tell you this. But if Jamahal Hill lands right on the end of Alex Pereira's chin, he's going to go to sleep, right? It's just human anatomy, and of course that's always a factor. But the people making the argument that Alex's boxing defense is awkward, I don't think they're understanding what he's doing. And I think Jamahal Hill eating those winging overhands from Thiago Santos is completely irrelevant here, and let me tell you why. Look at this clip from Alex's fight with Jiri. Jiri has him pressured up against the fence. And yeah, to the layman, it may seem that Alex is being real awkward here. His hands are up, he doesn't have a guard up, he seems very hittable. But the reason he's doing this is because it is not his style to shell up. Right now, right here, Pereira is looking for counters. And his left hook does not take any windup. That's why he has his arms out and forward. He's looking to land really short hooks. And yes, in this moment, he is more hittable, but that's because he is sacrificing his defense in order to find counters. And yes, in this specific sequence, Jiri got the better of the exchange because he baited Alex's counters and then landed immediately after. But just a few minutes later, they end up in that exact same sequence. Jiri tags him, he backs Pereira up against the fence, but Pereira doesn't shell up. He keeps his arms out, lands the short uppercut, and then hook drops Jiri and then finishes the fight. And that's what makes Pereira so dangerous in this matchup in particular. It may not seem like it, but these wild, huge hooks are not nearly as devastating as Pereira's short hooks. And this may seem counterintuitive because of the amount of torque going into Santos' punches. But let me give you a little boxing lesson. Notice the way that Santos is falling back as he's winging that punch. He's not planted, he's not sitting on the punch, and therefore it's losing a lot of power. And the reason he's throwing like that is because he's getting overwhelmed and he's getting desperate. And then look at this left hook KO by Pereira. It's so much shorter, so much less windup, but he's putting his entire body behind it. And because there's less windup means he can be way more accurate, and he lands it right on the money. Same exact thing with Jiri. Really short punch, Jiri didn't see it coming, and it was right on the chin. And you look at all of Jamahal Hill's fights, and he overwhelms guys. He gets into the pocket, stands right in front of you, and lights you up with combinations. Sure, if you run right into a punch, he'll put you out, like against Johnny Walker. But most of the time, Jamahal Hill is not a one-punch finisher kind of fighter. He gets guys with an accumulation of strikes. So in this matchup against Alex Pereira, Jamahal Hill is going to have to be standing in front of him, right in his face, lighting him up with combinations. But Pereira is not going to be throwing wild. He's always ready to find those short hook counters, and they are absolutely devastating. No one in the UFC can throw these hooks like Pereira. When you look at the amount of power Pereira has, how accurate he is, and how good he is at finding counters, to me, there's just no way in hell you can pick against him in this matchup.